Hi everyone, and thanks for joining us. My name is Anna Damoli and I'm an Italian visual designer and type design student currently living and working in Milan.
Hello everyone, my name is Eugene Yukechev. I'm a type designer, a typographer, and founding editor of Shift Publishers, Moscow, Berlin. It's an honor to be a part of ATypI this year for me and for us, for me and Anna. I wish you enjoy our presentation.
In this presentation, we will reveal our experiences and discoveries from the year we spent reviving two Renaissance typefaces by Robert Granjon under the supervision of Dr. Frank Blokland. This all happened at the expert class in type design course at the Plantin Institute of Typography. The aforementioned course is not a typical one, because it strongly ties the study of contemporary type design practice with a research on the centuries-old tradition, through inspection of available historic materials such as punches, smoke proofs, matrices, foundry type, and originally printed materials, and their profound examination. So let us start with introducing you to an idea from our supervisor Dr. Blokland's thesis on the origin of patterning in movable Latin type, Renaissance standardization, systematization, and unitization of textura and Roman type. Now let's head to our personal projects, and I will start by telling you about mine. I decided to revive one of Francesco Griffo's italics, and as you might know, Griffo was a famous Italian punch cutter, also known for developing the italic style. The reasons why I decided to revive a model from Griffo were many. I was fascinated by the fact that he was a pioneer of his time and by how influential his italic style ended up being both to later punch cutters but even to nowadays italic. I felt this style very close to me, also as I've been studying italic calligraphy for a couple of years now, and for the group projects of the expert class I was also reviving an italic. So we can say this image sums up pretty much my last year. At first I was concerned that working on italic for both projects was gonna end up being an overlap in my learning journey. But I can honestly say it was really interesting to work on it, and it turned out to be two completely different experiences and approaches as well. It wasn't easy to decide which italic model I was gonna revive, because actually in his career from 1501 to 1516, Francesco Griffo cut several italics, which turned out to be highly influential to the evolution of the italic style. So these are his first 5 italics, the ones he produced for third-party publishers before he started his very brief career as a publisher himself. But among all, Fano's cursive, which was cut in 1503, is considered by Italian historians to be Griffo's best and most influential italic, which is why I decided to revive this specific model. It is named Fano as the name of the Italian city where it was designed and cut. And the first difference I encountered when starting to research material for my project was that no original matrices or foundry type are left of Griffo's work. And thus I had to rely only on printed matter. So I had to find a book which contained the typeface I was reviving. This was the start of a very interesting journey to actually find a book containing that typeface. This is me browsing paper archives and handwritten catalogs in these very small Italian libraries, to then find out that the book I was looking for was actually lost. So, while it was supposed to be there, but no one could really find it. I then found another copy which was in such bad conditions that when the librarian handed it to me, he said, "I probably shouldn't even make you consult it." I then had to travel across Italy to find a better source for my revival. Which led me to Fano, the place where Griffo cut his italic and the place where I found a perfectly preserved book, completely typeset with the Fano cursive, and which served then as the main source of historical material for my revival. As I said, no foundry type or matrices are left of Griffo's work, and working with printed matter as a source was definitely a different thing. That's why I want to really highlight how important it was to me to find a properly preserved book, because that's all I could rely on to get information on the model. And here I want to show the different conditions of the books I consulted and took pictures of. And this really shows how ink bleeding, paper, and print quality can affect the overall perception of a model. Another fascinating feature of Griffo's italic is how he actually cut different shapes for the same letters. And here you can see just a few examples of the over 60 variations among characters and ligatures that Griffo's cut for the Fano italic in his successful attempt to recreate a very lively pattern. That was a relevant feature, as we know the creation of italic was inspired by Bartolomeo Sanvito handwriting and many others Italian calligraphers of the time. So I started sketching by hand first group of letters in order to give my interpretation of what the model could look like in a digital environment, and then moved those drawings in the font editor. So the research for an interpretation of letters that could be close to the model I was reviving was long, and I really learned how to pay attention to details. One of the hardest things was to try to distinguish what was an imperfection of print and what was actually a feature of the model. And here you can see an evolution from the first digital sketch to the current design. But besides reviving the Fano cursive, I was also curious to investigate standardization within this model and see if Frank Blokland's theory applied to it. So I started by measuring and making clusters of letters based on width plus side bearings. And of course, this is still a work in progress, but what I found out so far is that I'm able to fit all lowercase letters in 5 unit groups, as you can see here. And the number of units is 24 for one group, 16, 14, 12, and 10. And here on the left, you can see the units that I detected applied to the printed matter. As I said previously, units not only include the width of the character, but also its intrinsic side bearings. And on the right, the same units are applied in the font editor, but for the sake of simplicity, in the font editor, I used the bigger size for the units. So for example, in this case, I used the 8 instead of 16 for the G and the N, which both belong to the same cluster of letters. So I'm still researching and developing my personal project, even though the expert class has ended now, and I would really like to complete my research. And here you can see a preview of what my typeface look like right now in a big size. The spacing applied here is the one I detected from applying the patterning theory. And here's an overview of the text set in a size which is closer to the original printed matter that I used as a source. And now I will leave the word to Eugene and to his personal project.
So if you can hear me, so we are going to introduce ourselves. I'm Eugene Yukechev. I'm a type designer and typographer and publisher. And I'd like to introduce you to Anna.
Hi everyone, I'm Anna Damoli. I'm a visual designer and a type design student and a calligraphy passionate. And basically this presentation, we will reveal our experiences and discoveries from this year that we spent reviving 2 Renaissance typefaces by Robert Granjon under the supervision of Dr. Frank Blokland. And this all happened at the expert class in type design course at the Plantin Institute of Typography in Antwerp. So the aforementioned course is not a typical one because it strongly ties the study of contemporary type design practice with a research on centuries-old tradition through inspection of available historic materials such as punches, smoke proofs, matrices, foundry types, and originally printed materials, and their profound examination.
So Frank Blokland was looking for a way which could be used in by punch cutters to define the body size and the intrinsically related proportions of letter forms in the context of supposedly existing space system, which in its turn could significantly reduce the time and costs of all the cycle of type production and typesetting.
So looking at textura, we see the following. First, the letters are designed as if written by a broad nib, held with an angle of 30 degrees. And second, the width of each vertical stroke equals with each counter space, making it to a one-to-one relation. And third, taking this equals width as a unit, we can say that perfectly textura is a unitized typeface. Such a unitization gave the Renaissance type founders the fundamentals of classifying letters into groups of widths to make their work efficiently organized and also typesetting pleasantly harmonized. So Jensen's type, it is considered to be the first successful attempt to produce a classical idiom of the Roman type. It is perfect rhythm, even a fully justified typesetting, it's really charming. And also its regularity in letter forms as well as the proportion of letters is really astonishing. So by analyzing its letter forms, we can also derive a width-related system, which can be divided into several letter groups as well.
Although the shapes clearly differ, the morphology is essentially the same in texture and Roman type. Hence, the curved parts can be considered as overshoots of the straight strokes. Therefore, defining the side bearings for Roman type can be done in the same simple way as for textura type. This implies that the same groups of letters share the same character widths in both textura type and in Roman type. The interconnection between calligraphy and movable type are many and multidirectional. Movable type was influenced by humanistic handwriting and vice versa. But in Renaissance Roman type, the existence of an underlying patterning connected to the stem widths of characters is clearly visible. Here, yeah, here's the video. The stem width is used as a unit of space for a grid, and it's amazing to see how this results in a very precise reproduction of the foundry type materials and printed metal. Thus, this methodology allows to reproduce the visual textura and historical type. The research at our course included examination of the punches, negative close-up photographs of the punches, which is somehow equal to smoke proofs, matrices themselves, and imprints. What was missing and we thought would be crucial was the foundry type itself, examining which could throw more light to the factual side bearings of the type. The red and white rectangles in the slide indicate the unit system that was distilled from historical materials. And this is here. Here we go. Yeah. And this is the video which demonstrates a fresh take on the digital revival of Granjon's Scedonica Romain. A group of 4 students, Sander, Walter, Matthias, and Andy, undertook a deep investigation of the Romain typeface exclusively, Romain Scedonica of Granjon, analyzing the structure of the patterning, comparing original imprints, matrices, and finally making a digital font. The comparison of historical prints, matrices, and their digital font present a perfect match. On the left side is a fragment from Biblia Regia. On the right, the matrices from the Plantin-Moretus Museum collection. The historical material is connected by the digitized Romain, semi-transparent with a white outline. In terms of matrices, the digital font seamlessly corresponds with the historical print. And here you can see the outcome of the Romain group of our course, their research and their digital font. And what about italics? The research request of the last year of this year course of expert class type design was to find out whether a cross-standardization and cross-unitization between the 2 types of Granjon was used. But why? There are some reasons to consider both Scedonica types to be parts of the very first attempts in the field of matching of Romans and italics. Take a look at these 2 Scedonicas. They don't seem to have a common system, do they? Still, we wanted to find a patterning model, if any. Now, lowercase I seem to be the only letter with fixed stroke thickness and angle. A 24 degrees slanted grid conformed with it. Lowercase i's stem width taken as a grid interval. As a result, all the text lines on the examined page did fit into the grid. For example, notice several lowercase m's equal to 10 grid units in their width. The stems of lowercase u's, m's, and s's match the grid too. So do the strokes of the oval lowercase letters C, E, A, P. So with the transparent ruler and magnifying glass, we noted the matching of the X heights at 3 millimeters and of the ascenders at 5 millimeters. But the semi-ovals came as a surprise. In letters A, B, D, Q, P, and even H, their height was 1/4 millimeter less. So we decided to address the matrices and photonegatives as more reliable sources. A side-by-side comparison of those negatives of Romain and cursive revealed the ascenders, descenders, and capitals heights sharing comparable vertical symmetrics, while the X height of Romain being notably higher than of the cursive. A difference in pace was also notable, while lines set in Romain displayed regularity and rhythm of stems and bows. It was harder to witness such a regularity in cursives, in its powerful curves and miscellaneous angles of inclination. So matrices were like a source of fine details, character of type, peculiarities of letter forms, etc. And then, working with Biblia Regia, we discovered that the letter morphology is divisible by the grid unit. X height equal 6 units, the extenders equal 4 units. We saw it as a harmonic proportion, which clarified our further calculations in Gliese application. First, we used a slanted grid with a 24 degrees angle and a stem width spacing for the lowercase, and sorted the letters into width groups. At that time, we still didn't understand how Granjon worked with side bearings of cursive, and expected we would just add half unit space on both side bearings. With the figure 3, we realized that the slant of extenders won't be calibrated optically, but defined by units, with a decline from the grid by 1 or 2 units. Now we see the uppercase letters have a different slant. It is approximately 1.5 times less than of the lowercase, which makes it about 16 degrees. Consequently, the stem is thicker, which leads us to calculating an individual grid space for the uppercase letters. So we switch to digital workflow and divide the aforementioned unit into 66 glyphs units. We also use a horizontal grid of 80 units for uppercase letters and 66 units for lowercase. We make it a refined grid with axis spacing twice less than 80 and 66 units respectively. Both grids differ horizontally but equal vertically. Now let's focus here on side bearings. Having no proof of Granjon's calculation, our expectation was he added half a unit to both side bearings. But after an accurate examination of letters in a line, we noticed the so to say
serifed sides. So here on I, N, M, and so on, having no side bearing at all. They literally stand one right after another on the grid, while the rounded ones, like in Q, A, O, B, have a unit added to the round side. Here you can see it. Q, A, O, and so on. So here is an example of lowercase a with side bearings of 1 unit of the left and 0 on the right. It displays a quite regular rhythm. Now, if we think twice, the Renaissance punch cutter could only cut the italics on rectangular metal bodies. So we straightened the glyphs like this. And the rectifying of the grid left the lowercase a remain perfectly fit in its place with 0 side bearings on both sides. Some effects for all the others shown letters. Same effect for all the other shown letters. We suggest that when designing italics, it is helpful to use 2 unit arranged grids at the same time, a slanted one for join and a straight upright one to stay aware of proper side bearings. And here's one more video. Yeah. What if you put Roman lettering in cursive surrounding, remaining strictly in the grid? Yes, it fit the grid in this case. Thus, we suppose cross-standardization and cross-unitization could work this way for Granjon. He could cut cursive using his calculation for Romain, which had been released about a year earlier. And here is a comparison between 2 grids. And in the end of all experiments, we did the proof which could have been done at the very beginning of our journey. Back then, we didn't seem rational, but now it looks like an obvious step we should have started with. But in short, if we take a stem grid of the Schidonica Romain, so here it is in 10 units, based on the stem width of the lowercase I, and slant it to 24 degrees, which is an approximate angle of inclination of the Schidonica cursive, we can find out a perfect match of the grid with the cursive text pattern. And it's interesting to see how the width or our perception of width or both of it can affect these examples. So this is 10 units straightened, and the same 10 units slanted to 24 degrees. And then we tried to rework our cursive project by Roman grid and readjusted the letter forms in their correct places on the bodies. Made a fully calculated and adjusted model of the typeface with a simplified design. I'll try to play the video. And compared it with the historical example. We see it as a basic for proving that cross-standardization and cross-unitization could exist, even though our research still requires further investigation. In the description of my personal project, I will tell you how this knowledge can be used in a contemporary type design and contemporary practice. Right after Anna presents her personal project devoted to italics of
Thank you.
Francesco Grifo. Oh, here you go.
Thank you. Okay, so let's head now to our personal project. And I will start by telling you about mine. So I decided to revive one of Francesco Grifo's italics. And as you might know, Grifo was a famous Italian punchcutter, also known for inventing the italic style. And the reasons why I decided to revive a model from Grifo were many. First of all, I was really fascinated by the fact that he was a precursor of his time and by how influential his italic style ended up being to later punch cutters, but even to nowadays italic. So I felt this style very close to me, also as I've been studying italic calligraphy for a couple of years, and for the group project of the expert class, I was also reviving an italic. So as you can see, this was basically me last year. This image sums up pretty much what I was doing for the whole year. So at first I was concerned that working on italic for both projects was gonna end up being like an overlap in my learning journey. But I can honestly say it was really interesting to work on it, and it turned out to be two completely different experiences and approaches as well. So it wasn't easy to decide which italic model I was gonna revive, because actually in his career, and from 1501 to 1516, Francisco Grifo cut several italics, which turned out to be highly influential to the evolution of the italic style. So these shown here are his first 5 italics, or at least the one that he produced for third-party publishers before he started his very brief career as a publisher himself. But among all, Fano's cursive, which is the one highlighted here, and it was cut in 1503, and it is considered by Italian historians to be Grifo's best and most influential italic, which is why I decided to revive this specific model. It is named Fano after the Italian city where it was designed and cut. And the first difference I encountered when starting to research material for my project was that no original matrices or foundry type are left of Grifo's work, and thus I had to rely only on printed matter. So I had to find a book which contained the typeface I was reviving. So this was the start of a very interesting journey to actually find a book containing that typeface. This is me browsing paper archives and handwritten catalogs in these very, very small Italian libraries, to then find out that the book I was looking for was actually lost. Well, it was supposed to be there, but no one could find it. So I then found another copy, which was in such bad condition. Then when the librarian handed it to me, he said, I probably shouldn't even make you consult it. So I then had to travel across Italy to find a better source for my revival, which led me to Fano, the place where Grifo cut his italic, and the place where I found a perfectly preserved book, completely typeset with the Fano cursive, which served as the main source of historical material for my revival. So as I said, no foundry type or matrices are left of Grifo's work. And working with printed matter as a source was definitely a different thing. That's why I want to really highlight how important it was to me to find a properly preserved book, because that's all I could rely on to get information on the model. And here on this page, I want to show the different conditions of the books I consulted and took pictures of. And this really shows how ink bleeding, paper, print quality can affect the overall perception of a model. So another fascinating feature of Grifo's italic is how he actually cuts different shapes for the same letters. And here you can see just a few examples of the over 60 variations among characters and ligatures that Grifo cut for the Fano italic in his very successful attempt to recreate a lively pattern. And that was a relevant feature, as we know the creation of italic was inspired by Bartolomeo Sanvito handwriting and many other calligraphers of the time. So in the meantime, I started sketching by hand the first group of letters in order to give my interpretation of what the model could look like in digital. And then I moved those drawings in the font editor. So here are some more sketches. The research for an interpretation of letters that could be, in my opinion, close to the model I was reviving was really long. And I really learned how to pay attention to details. So one of the hardest things was to try to distinguish what was an imperfection of print and what was actually a feature of the model. And here you can see like just an evolution from the first digital sketch to the current design of the letter A. But besides reviving the Fano cursive, I was also curious to investigate standardization within this model and to see if Frank Blokland's theory applied to it. So I started by measuring and making clusters of letters based on width of the letters plus the side bearings. And of course, this is still a work in progress, but what I found out so far is that I was able to fit all lowercase letters in 5 units groups, as you can see on this page. On the left here, you can see how my units detected were applied to the printed matters. And as I said previously, units not only include the width of the character, but also its intrinsic side bearings. And on the right, the same units were applied in the font editor. But for the sake of simplicity, in the font editor, I used bigger units. So for example, in this case, I used 8 instead of 16 for the G and the N, which belong to the same cluster. So as I said, I'm still researching and developing my personal projects, even though the expert class has now ended, but I would really like to complete my research. And here you can see a preview of what my typeface looks like in a big size. And the spacing applied here is the one I detected from applying the patterning theory. And here is an overview of the text set in a size which is closer to the one in the printed matter that I used as a source. And I will leave now the word to Eugene and to his personal project.
Thank you, Anna. So yeah, I'm going to speak about my personal project. It's about reviving Robert Granjon's Petit Canon Romain and Petit Parangon cursive. This is Christophe Plantin's magnum opus, Biblia Regia. And it's not only a monument of the publisher, actually, but also a treasure trove of the works of many Renaissance punch cutters. You can see here works and typefaces by Claude Garamond, Robert Granjon, François Guillot, Pierre Etienne, Hendrik van der Keer, Guillaume Lebet, and so on and so on. So it couldn't serve better as a specimen for any type designer. And at the very beginning of the Bible, so the preface of the Bible is set into charming typeface, which you can see here. And yeah, as Hendrik Verviers said in his Paleotypography of the French Renaissance, the type appears in many German specimens, sometimes wrongly attributed to Garamond. And English type historian Harry Carter judged this typeface not good enough to be cut either by Garamond or Granjon. This is intriguing, but there is no reasons to hesitate on attribution to a young Granjon. So the typeface was widely popular among publishers across Europe, even by Venetian printer Paulus Manuccius. Here it is. Unfortunately, the matrices of the type was lost. They were lost sometime somewhere in the beginning of 16th century. But the type itself, the foundry type, is preserved in the Plantin-Moretus Museum, and it was happy to be able. I was be able to work with it. So here you can see the imprint of the type and the underlined stem grid, which helped me to analyze the type from the very beginning. So you can see here the x height, the basic parameters actually of the type. The x height is equal 6 units, ascenders and descenders 5 units, uppercase 10 units. And here you can see the type itself. The proportion of the lowercase n is 5 to 6 units. So I've been surprised how exact the parameters were and how they match the grid. So this is the first type in my project. The second is italic. The italic is a bit smaller than their own type, but started to analyze it through the same method with the stem grid. And the next step I made is a drawing. I'd like to quote John Berger from his essay on drawing. For the artist, drawing is discovery, and that is not just a slip phrase, it is quite literally true. It's the actual act of drawing that forces the artist to look at the object in front of him, to dissect it in his mind's eye, and to put it together again. So what I've tried to do is to examine the type and to dissect it in my mind and to put it together again. And I used three mediums here. So first is an imprint from Biblia Regia. The second one is a microscope photographs from the foundry type. And the third one is my drawings through the stem grid first. So I used the grid to analyze and examine the type. And here we can see the digital form and multiply the digital font with the typeface. So for me, it was crucial not to trace the letters, but trying to understand them, understand the morphology of the Granjon's idiom, and translate it into the digital environment. Here we can see some drawings, and the drawings themselves are not the finished shapes. It's just an examination to make clear some details and structure of the type. Here you can see my notes too, with questions and some details to clarify it. And after that, when I put all the things together, I used the patterning model for both typefaces, for Roman typeface and for italic. And this slide is quite important. You can see here the stem interval divided into half and a half. And you can see here the side bearings of every letter. And I used two grids for italic, as I mentioned this in the first part of our research. I used the slanted grid in 24 degrees of inclination for italic for drawing, and the upright grid for defining the spacing. So the underlined upright grid is equal for Roman and for italic, and depicts or demonstrates the cross-unitization, like an approach to design a type family. And here is some outcome. So I'm still working on the type family, but here you can see the three styles: the headline, original, and text Roman. The original one is closer to original foundry type in the means of contrast and color of text. The headline is more here you can see more contrast, and so I suppose it's closer to matrices. The matching italic to origin Roman, we could see it on the previous slide. And here's the style number 3, text Roman, with shortened ascenders and descenders and more compact uppercase letters. So I suppose to use, for example, the text style for more practical typesetting of running texts. Yeah, here it is, like in its presentation mode. So I like to make a tribute here to Bram de Dus with his Trinity type family. So this from his model, like a parametric type. I took an inspiration. Here's a basic character set in of the headline style. And here's a basic proof test by Jonathan Hoffler, which I found extremely practical. And I would like to note here a confidence with working with spacing and simultaneously designing typeface, thinking of spacing and letter forms and shapes and so on and so on. Here you see no spacing, no kerning at all, and the result, so the outcome of the type setting is already so it could work without kerning. So you can see some details which should be or have to be kerned, like TU or YO and so on and so on. It's inevitable, actually, but the typesetting and evenness of typesetting, looks to me pretty good. So you can get this from thinking simultaneously, spacing within the design process. And it's important. Yeah, it seems like we finished. Thank you very much for your attention. And I think we can answer some questions.
All done. Just toggle your video on in the top left of the screen there on the Visibo interface, and so we can actually see you while people are asking questions.
So should I stop sharing, right?
Yeah, so you can, unless you can stop sharing the slides, or just add the video for that matter, in case people want to refer to the slides. You have at least one question in the question area.
Stop this stop. And
so you need to.
There
you go. Yeah.
Here we go. Hi, everyone.
And if Anna can do the same. You had one question in the question Q&A area from way back in the presentation, I think in Anna's section maybe, how to take into account the differences in angle for descender minuscules.
Oh, it's a very good question. So I think it's for me, right?
Yeah, I'm not. I think that might have been from Anna's section, actually.
Okay, Anna, would you like to answer?
I think. Hi, sorry, I was on mute. So I think this actually regards both, but because it's a matter, to me, it's a matter of interpretation, how to actually account these differences in angle. Because I remember that for the group projects, we actually decided to, like, let's say, balance these light differences in angles. Eugene, correct me if I'm wrong, but that was the idea, like to say, okay, we don't care if there are tiny differences. We're gonna keep that equal and decide like for balance slant. And instead, for my personal projects, I decided to just keep those differences in slant, and thus my typeface is really let's call it lively. But it's really not regular in the slant, and so you can see how it really like dances in the page. So to me, I would say that that's a matter of interpretation. You can treat it in different ways. But Eugene, if you can add something on your side.
Yeah, I would add. From the experience of Askedonica, for example, when we applied the grid system, actually the basic stem grid to the Askedonica, we could reveal that the angle of inclination fits to the grid, to the steps of the grid. So, for example, ascenders, which seems to be quite different. They can be measured by step of the grid. So one step to the left or two steps to the left for optical correction. The same worked for the descenders. And designing my personal project, the italic for my personal project, I use the same approach to define the angle of inclination of the ascenders and descenders by the stem grid. So it's quite practical.
I think there is another question. I think this is for you, Eugene.
Sorry?
I think there is a question for you by Frederick.
Should I read it?
Yeah.
The next talk that I'm moderating, but you guys can feel free to continue. Just if people need to get to another talk, they may have to bug out.
Okay.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Thomas.
Thank you.
Actually, I don't see
So he
any
says,
question.
I created a revival of the typeface in 1611, King James Bible, and traced the letters from scans. And you mentioned at one point you don't like to trace. Can you talk about some of the reasons in terms of benefits and drawbacks of both approaches?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I felt like when I trace the historical material, I couldn't feel the idiom maybe, and I couldn't add my interpretation, which I find also important. When I draw the letters and I try to replicate to the letter forms I see, of course, I'm trying to draw as close as possible. But it's inevitable when you draw with intention of artistically, maybe artistically interpretation, you've got automatically a personal outcome of the typeface. So for me, it was important not to copy the historical model, but to understand it and to put it in digital environment. So in our environment in so contemporary contemporary usage. Yeah, if I answered the question.
I think you did, because, yeah, he says, thanks for answer, interesting. So I don't know if anyone has other questions. We would be happy to answer.
I think that's it.
Yeah, I think so.
So we have no moderator here?
No, I'm not sure, but I think Yana might be here. Yeah, I see. Yeah, because also a big part of this whole thing was the group, the class that we had in Antwerp that we sadly had to leave behind because of COVID. But we are meeting now here, so that's nice. We are seeing each other again. So thank you guys for joining us. It was really nice, and nothing. Have a nice evening and ATypI conference.
Thank you. Yeah, bye-bye.
Everyone.